Okay, so we've got Juan Araya back for another iteration of COE. Juan, thanks for doing this, as always.
Yes, no, thank you, Seth. It's great to be here.
So last time we talked about the Uber days, and so a next step would obviously be what your list of priorities are for the new shop. Now, you've been there for a little bit, but it's still a new list.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been here for a few months already, and depending on what's the nature of the business and what's going on with the center, it can be very rocky or it can be very confusing. So I've been going through that path, and maybe there's a little bit of both for me. But I guess it's also part of what you expect when you're joining a new organization and you have to find your way in. So it's not easy, but you have to make it fun.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I would imagine it feels like you're there now. I think last time we spoke, it was still very early days.
Yeah.
And yeah, right. So I mean, this is now home, albeit different, but home.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, when we last spoke, maybe I had a few weeks around, and it was still very strange. But now it does feel like home. Now I know where I'm at most of the time, and you start feeling productive and helpful. So yes, things have improved.
There you go. All right. So productive and helpful. Your priorities, you've split them up. You've got 3 for yourself and 3 for your team. So
Yeah,
which list do we want to tackle first?
yeah. So I'll probably start with the personal ones. So the way I usually, and this is how I organize myself as well on my everyday tasks, um, which is a challenge that I guess most managers will have, which is you have to manage a team, you have certain priorities, you have certain goals that you need to accomplish, but it's not necessarily what you're actually doing, meaning that your personal tasks might be something else. So I try to keep 2 separate lists, right, and 2 separate sets of priorities. One, stuff that I know that my organization needs to accomplish, and the other is what I need to do, and the things that I should focus on.
Okay.
And that's usually where I start. So for me, there are three big priorities personally, as an individual, as I joined this team. So the first one is to know the organization, and that to me is important for a number of reasons. Like I was maybe speaking about in the introduction, you need to understand where you are. You need to understand where the team fits. And maybe more important than that, it's that you need to understand the relationships and the connections that your team has with other people and other stakeholders. So you know this, but shared services tend to interact with a number of different teams within organizations, and so you need to understand, well, what are those teams? How are they structured in this new company? What are the roles and responsibilities of all those different teams? Who are our stakeholders? That sort of thing. And that's critical because also one role that the director of the center has which is quite unique, it's that it's sometimes you're the only one that can make that connection externally. Sometimes. And I prefer not to be that, and I prefer that my team is able to resolve everything through whomever they need to work with. But sometimes you need to facilitate that communication. Sometimes you need to know which doors try to open, which help to get from whom, that sort of thing. So understanding the organization from that point of view, it's critical. Again, because it's one role that I will play that maybe I'm the best positioned to do that right now.
Yeah. It also feels like that takes away or removes some of the heavy lifting that you need to do in real time. If you can't see that bigger picture, if you never kind of took those steps back to make sure, okay, here's where I am, here's where the team sits, here's how we all interact, here's what only I do. If you never actually put that list together, it becomes pretty daunting.
Yes, it can be, and it can be very confusing. And you might not see the value of it immediately, but later on, you know. And those are the things that, especially when you're new, you need to catch up. People that have been there for a long time, they know how things work, they know the environment, but you don't. So you need to understand the world that you're now living in. And I've been a part of a number of companies, and no two are alike. There are many things that are similar, but eventually every company is quite unique. So you need to go through that learning.
All right. So setting the internal enterprise GPS, number one.
Yes. The other thing, which goes maybe at a more conceptual level, is understanding the priorities. And this can go in two directions. One is understanding the priorities of the business, because you need to understand what business you're in. So for example, before it was, for example, Uber, and Uber was all about growth. It was a lot about safety. And those were like big priorities within Uber. Here, the environment, it's a little bit different. So there are other types of priorities where maybe controls are more important, where cash flow, it's more important. So you need to understand those things. And again, within a shared service, you will have different teams, but you will need to prioritize. You need to give some direction and make sure that you're focusing efforts in a way that adds the most value. So understanding those business-wide priorities and goals is essential. Usually that's something easy, but you also need to pay attention and try to understand how you connect with that. And then, of course, understanding the priorities of the shared service center. It's of course probably the first question that you would be asking, and is it, what should I be doing? What should I be accomplishing? And then you try to connect those two. Sometimes it's not easy, but again, if you, I think you can be very successful if you can connect those two. Make sure that, okay, you're accomplishing the center specific goals from a shared services point of view, but also at the same time you're having a contribution, and you know how that connects with the rest of the organization. Yeah. So that's number two for me.
Okay, so it feels like the first one was kind of what is the organization and how do I navigate that, and the second one is almost the why and how. Even though I said how for the first one too, but what are we all focused on here? What are the big picture goals? Okay, that's number two. Number three.
Yeah. Number three, it's a hybrid of a couple different topics. And I maybe can start by mentioning that I think it's important for me to build trust. And this goes at different levels and with different teams. What I found is that in order to build trust, you also need to make sure that you demonstrate others that you understand the job that they're doing, and that you could be helpful, that you can actually get some things done. So earning that trust is also a lot around learning at this point in time. So you have to be, I guess, humble, especially at the very beginning, and walk in and say, hey, I need to learn. And I need to learn from my analysts, the clerks, anybody here, my managers as well, anybody that we're interacting with, other teams, and then, of course, executives and other stakeholders. You need to learn from them. And people are usually quite welcoming on that, but it's also something that with experience you might want to skip somehow. You might want to assume that but you need to go through that and be very conscious about it. And I think that is a way to start earning trust. I think, of course, the next level is to start delivering results. But at this point in time, there hasn't been enough progress so that we can say, yeah, we're doing that, we're driving that. But at least from a personal point of view, I know that my team needs to trust me. So they need to feel that I'm somebody that understands what they're doing deep enough, but also stakeholders as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously you are good at what you do. That's how you got the job. Obviously, you've been doing it for a while, so you know what you're doing, no matter where
Yeah.
you work. However, that does have to be a mental exercise that you have to do. You have to, okay, wait a second. Let me remind myself and others that I'm humble. Let me remind myself and others that I have empathy, so that they don't get confused as to my, what I should have, the pride in my work, but they don't confuse that pride with ego.
Exactly. And again, especially when you're joining a new team, and in this case, we're building a team from scratch. So people will be looking up to you, and people will be paying attention, and maybe I can go to my next three priorities, because my next three priorities are more for the team.
There we go.
The first one for me is building a culture, which I think that I spoke several times, I think, in our last conversation. And building a culture is something that it's of course better if you can do early on. And right now I'm lucky that this is a new team. If it was not a new team, then you need to make sure that you fit. And then trying to change the culture is not easy. But in my case, we're getting started. So building that culture is the first thing that I'd like to do. And I think that I spoke about this before, but I think that through the right culture, we can fix a number of things later on. We can solve problems in a better way. We can communicate better. And then we can stay focused on the right goals. So for example, right now, like I mentioned, controls is important here. We're part of a medical technology industry where it's probably very highly regulated. The impact of not being compliant with anything or errors is high. So building a culture where compliance is a top priority, then it's one of the things that I'm doing. So making sure that I not only speak about compliance is important, but actually I made it one of my 4 key goals. I made it one of the key goals for managers and for everybody else in the center. We're spending resources on that, on training on that specific topic. So through those actions, you create the culture. So that's the first thing that's on my mind.
Yeah.
And again, it's not an easy process, and not something that you can control completely anyway. You kind of direct it and,
right.
and hope that it gets to where you are. So you also need to be flexible, because the culture is not something that the leader of the team builds alone. Everybody builds it, and you can influence it somehow. What you shouldn't do is stand back and let it go and let it flow wherever it might want to go. So
I was going to say, it's like controlling how the water flows. You just can't do it. You can try to guide it as best you can.
Yes.
But some of that is going to be outside of your direct, authority, right?
Yeah. Which is, by the way, one of my favorite things about thinking about culture, which is sometimes you find things that the team is naturally inclined to be or inclined to do, which you hadn't thought of. But you need to be aware of those things and be flexible and say, well, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I should promote this idea. But those are the nice things that will come up. And if you're flexible enough, then you can take advantage of it. And it's like playing your strengths. And if those come naturally for the team, then you just keep on promoting that one.
There we go. So the always, I don't want to say elusive, but the amorphous culture piece. So
yes.
setting that as best as you can. What would be number 2?
Yes. So number 2 is performance metrics. If you're getting started, and it's actually the first thing that I pay attention when I actually sit down at a new job, and let's look at the numbers. And that'll start telling you the truth. And you'll hear a lot around opinions and feelings and you'll hear a lot of those things in organizations, but you need to look at the numbers. And yeah, so even if this was not a new shop, that's something that I would pay attention to and try to assess if the metrics and the SLAs that exist make sense or not, and if they're able to tell you the right story. And in our case, because we're getting started and we're migrating some work from locations that were not necessarily operating like this, not all of those, then we're working a lot in developing these metrics. And again, this is critically important, because without this, then we don't have a clear way to assess if things are going well or not, and to what extent. And then it allows you to have good objective conversations around performance.
Yeah.
Which is also something that happens at the very beginning in the life cycle. People start having questions or doubts or concerns, or they're happy, whatever, but it might not be an objective conversation until you put the numbers
in. Yeah. This is what we're measuring. This is why we're measuring it. This is how it fits in with the bigger picture. Let's get to work. Yeah. No question. I mean, we can talk about any question that you have, but it's very simple if you just look at the bottom line.
Yeah. And it sounds like a simple topic. In essence, you can sit down and there's a standard list of metrics that you could pick and choose from the industry. It sounds very simple, but I think that everybody that has been working in this for some time will tell you it's not easy at all, because then teams are structured in a way where this is not easily available. Systems are not always ready to do this for you. And then there are a number of circumstances around collecting data that makes it difficult.
Yes, and forgive me, I was not. I would not mean to say that it was simple. I was assuming that we were able to find that exact right number, that's elusive. I used the word elusive before. That's an elusive thing.
No, and it's really conceptually it's a simple idea. It's a simple goal, but the execution can be very, it's just can be very hard and painful. And so you have to push through that. And it's become one of our priorities right now. And it's also one of those things where you can go crazy as well. I think, in my opinion, you can do too much. And you can become obsessed with every little detail of the operation. And I think that once a center matures, you can have a lot of data, a lot of information, but you need to make sure that you build a structure where people are looking at the right data, so that it's effective and not be overwhelmed with too much detail. So it's a fine balance around those things. And yeah, it's actually a funny process in some ways, because it leads to a number of conversations that are quite interesting in terms of how people understand their roles, their processes, what's important, what's not.
Conceptually simple. We have identified now with, I think, 5 goals that we've discussed, 5 priorities, excuse me. We have found the most difficult one.
Yes.
Unless number 3 on the team side is even more difficult. What would that be?
I think this might be more difficult in a way, because this is around frontline management. And I'm a big proponent to have a very strong frontline management team. And again, especially in teams that are large. And once you start having an organization that's in the hundreds, you want to make sure that the day-to-day work gets done very well. Sometimes you focus a lot on your upper leadership, and maybe some of the middle management in a way. And you try to get the right people there, of course. But sometimes it's the frontline management that will drive a lot of the decision making, that will drive a lot of the improvements, that will drive a lot of around how the culture is perceived. And if you have a good, strong team there, pretty much your day-to-day should be in perfect shape. If that's not strong enough, then you can have problems that will set you back, and then it will take you some time to fix it. So that's why it's important to me right now, because again, we're growing. So the team is still not, I guess, significantly large enough, but we know that this frontline management team will carry the torch through several months as we get bigger and bigger, and we need to deliver at that level.
I find it interesting that you didn't say anywhere with frontline management the empowering ownership piece. Because I feel like the empowering ownership piece is a double-edged sword, in that you're delegating when you say empowering ownership, to the front lines, and then taking yourself out of that kind of management piece. And so then there's where your problems maybe can start. So
yeah,
that's an interesting concept.
Yes, and I think you need to also understand what's your talent like at that level, and what are the gaps already. In for existing organizations, that may or may not be a weakness, but it's also one of the first places that I would look at when assessing what things need to get fixed. And I'm usually also trying to think how to get the basics right, which is top of mind for me at this moment. We want to deliver the basics. We don't want to go crazy on improvements right now. We're just a few months old. We don't want to change the world yet. We want to get there at some point. But right now, we want to deliver the basics. We want to be good at it. And you want to build a team that can do it consistently. And again, that frontline management is like having a front line of coaches that are doing the best for your teams to get better over time.
All right. So we've got 3 priorities for you, 3 priorities for the team.
Yes.
None of them sound easy, but
No.
I guess, this is why you're there. You guys, this is the job, right?
Yeah. So it's a balancing act. And these things change as well. So these are not very static. So you should also try to keep at least some concepts in your mind stable. And then you can adjust your priorities over time, but because they will not be the same. And then the other thing is, you don't want to send mixed messages to your team, because if you're constantly changing what's the priority, then of course people will be very confused and might not trust you. But yeah, so keeping in mind those things and trying to stay consistent on some of those big ideas and why those are important, then it's relevant. But staying flexible, because they will change.
There you go. All right. So you've got these 6 big priorities that are going to change at some point, but they can't change too quickly because then you'll lose trust. So again, I am very pleased to be on this side of the table and have you have to execute on these priorities. I can't wait for the next one. These are great. Juan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And already looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, no, Seth, as always, it's been great talking to you, and looking forward to our next conversation.